The late October sun cast long shadows across Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, Ohio, as 12-year-old Tommy Martinez wheeled his custom-built wheelchair closer to the chain-link fence that separated the stands from the Emerald Field below. His worn Cincinnati Reds cap, a cherished hand-me-down from his older brother Carlos, sat slightly crooked on his head, carefully positioned to cover the surgical scars that marked his lifelong battle with spina bifida, a condition that had claimed his ability to walk, but had never dimmed his passionate love for America's pastime. The concrete stadium around him buzzed with the familiar sounds of pre-game preparation. Vendors hawking hot dogs and peanuts, the crack of wooden bats connecting with leather-wrapped baseballs during batting practice, and the excited chatter of fans settling into their seats for what might be one of the final games of a disappointing season for the Cincinnati Reds. Tommy had been making this pilgrimage to Riverfront Stadium with his father, Miguel Martinez, for nearly 3 years now. Ever since his 10th birthday, when Miguel had surprised him with tickets to a game against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Miguel worked crushing double shifts at the Armco steel mill on the banks of the Ohio River, his calloused hands and aching back a testament to the physical demands of feeding molten steel into massive furnaces. The overtime pay barely covered their modest family's basic needs, but Miguel understood that baseball meant more to his youngest son than anything else in the world, and he was willing to sacrifice whatever it took to nurture that passion. While other boys Tommy's age spent their afternoons running through the neighborhood streets, playing pickup games of baseball, football, or basketball, Tommy devoted his time to memorizing batting averages, studying pitcher-hitter matchups, analyzing defensive positioning strategies, and immersing himself completely in the statistical complexities that made baseball as much a mental game as a physical one. His bedroom walls were covered with newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and hand-drawn charts, tracking the performance of every player on the Cincinnati Reds roster. "Mijo, we should probably start thinking about heading home soon," Miguel said gently, placing a work-roughened hand on his son's thin shoulder. "Your mother will have dinner ready in an hour, and you know how much she worries when we stay out too late on school nights." Tommy nodded absently, but kept his intense gaze fixed on the field where the Cincinnati Reds were finishing their final batting practice session of the day. There, wearing the iconic number 14 uniform, was the man who had captured Tommy's imagination and admiration more completely than any other athlete in any sport. Pete Rose, better known throughout baseball as Charlie Hustle, for his relentless, never-give-up approach to every aspect of the game. Even from their distant bleacher seats, the only tickets Miguel's factory wages could afford, Tommy could observe the distinctive intensity that characterized every one of Pete Rose's movements. Whether he was taking practice swings in the batter's box, fielding ground balls at first base, or simply jogging between stations during drills, Rose attacked each activity with the same ferocity and determination that had earned him a reputation as one of the hardest-working players in Major League Baseball history. "Just 5 more minutes, Papa, please," Tommy pleaded, his voice carrying the earnest desperation that only a 12-year-old can muster. "I want to see if he can hit another one over the wall. He's been having trouble with his timing lately. I've been tracking his at-bats for the past month, and his swing has been just a fraction of a second late on fastballs." Miguel's heart clenched with a familiar mixture of pride and pain as he watched his son's unwavering devotion to a sport he would never be able to participate in physically. The doctors at Cincinnati Children's Hospital had been devastatingly clear from Tommy's earliest days. The spina bifida had affected his spinal cord development in such a way that he would never walk, never run the bases, never experience the pure joy of connecting bat to ball in an actual game situation. But Miguel had learned over the years not to voice these heartbreaking realities aloud. Instead, he encouraged his son's passion with quiet determination, understanding that baseball provided Tommy with something precious and irreplaceable: hope purpose, and a connection to something larger than his physical limitations. As they continued watching, Pete Rose stepped into the batter's box and took his familiar stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, bat held high and steady, eyes laser-focused on the pitcher's release point. The batting practice pitcher delivered a fastball down the middle of the strike zone, and Rose's swing was a thing of beauty, not the violent uppercut motion of a power hitter seeking home runs, but the level, controlled stroke that had already produced more base hits than any player in the long and storied history of professional baseball. The ball exploded off Rose's bat with a sharp crack that echoed throughout the stadium, soaring high and deep toward the left field wall. Tommy's eyes tracked the ball's trajectory with the practiced precision of someone who had watched thousands of similar swings, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair with white-knuckled excitement as the ball cleared the fence by mere feet. "Did you see that perfect swing mechanics, Papa?" Tommy exclaimed, his voice cracking with emotion and admiration. "That's exactly why he's the hit king. Nobody in the entire history of baseball has ever worked harder or been more dedicated to perfecting their craft than Pete Rose." Miguel smiled at his son's enthusiasm, the expression tinged with bittersweet memories of his own childhood dreams of playing professional baseball. Those aspirations had been abandoned decades ago when the harsh realities of adult responsibility, marriage, children, mortgage payments, and the need for steady employment had redirected his life's trajectory toward the steel mill and away from diamond dreams. "Sí, mijo," Miguel agreed with genuine warmth. He never gives up on any play, no matter how impossible it might seem to everyone else watching. As the players began their customary post-practice jog toward the clubhouse tunnel, Tommy cupped his small hands around his mouth and gathered every ounce of strength his developing lungs could muster. "Mr. Rose, Mr. Rose, you're my hero. I come to every game I can." His voice carried across the stadium with remarkable clarity, the words infused with years of accumulated admiration, respect, and longing. Several players glanced casually toward the stands in response to the shouting, but most continued their routine departure without acknowledgement. Tommy's shoulders sagged slightly with disappointment, but his eyes remained fixed on his idol's retreating figure until Pete Rose disappeared completely into the shadows of the tunnel. The drive home through Cincinnati's working-class neighborhoods unfolded in contemplative silence. Tommy pressed his face against the passenger window of their aging Ford pickup truck, watching the familiar urban landscape roll past: corner markets with hand-painted Spanish signs, small houses with carefully maintained flower gardens despite the challenging urban environment, and groups of neighborhood children playing street hockey under the amber glow of streetlights that were beginning to flicker on as dusk approached. Tommy's neighborhood on the east side of Cincinnati was a world away from the glamorous, well-publicized lifestyle of professional baseball players, but it was home, a place where families like the Martinezes worked hard, supported each other through difficult times, and held on to dreams despite the daily challenges of making ends meet on factory wages and cleaning service income. Their house on Elm Street was a modest two-story structure that Miguel and his wife Rosa had purchased with a VA loan when Carlos was born 15 years earlier. The front porch sagged slightly under the weight of multiple Cincinnati winters, and the exterior paint was beginning to peel and fade. But Rosa had transformed every available inch of yard space into a botanical wonderland filled with flowers, vegetables, and plants that bloomed magnificently despite the urban environment's challenges. "How was the game tonight, mis hijos?" Rosa asked warmly as father and son entered through the kitchen door, where the rich, comforting aroma of her famous arroz con pollo filled the air with the promise of a home-cooked meal. Rosa Martinez was a petite woman with gentle brown eyes and prematurely graying hair that she kept pulled back in a neat bun. Her hands showed the inevitable wear and calluses that came from years of cleaning houses throughout Cincinnati's wealthier neighborhoods to supplement Miguel's mill income. "Pete Rose hit a home run during batting practice," Tommy exclaimed, his earlier disappointment at not getting his hero's attention temporarily forgotten in his excitement to share the evening's highlights. "And I called out to him, Mama. I'm pretty sure he might have heard me this time." Rosa exchanged a knowing, concerned look with Miguel across the kitchen table. Over the years, they had learned to navigate the delicate emotional balance between nurturing Tommy's baseball dreams and protecting him from the inevitable disappointments that came with hoping for something that seemed impossibly out of reach for a working-class family from Cincinnati's east side. "That's absolutely wonderful, mijo," Rosa said with genuine enthusiasm while setting a plate of food in front of her youngest son. "Maybe someday you'll get the chance to meet him properly and tell him how much his playing means to you." Carlos looked up from his homework. College application essays and scholarship forms scattered across the kitchen counter like pieces of a puzzle that might determine his entire future. At 17 years old, Carlos Martinez embodied everything Tommy sometimes wished he could be: tall and athletic, popular at McKinley High School, talented enough at football to attract attention from college scouts, and possessed of the kind of natural physical gifts that opened doors Tommy knew would always remain closed to him. But there was no jealousy between the Martinez brothers, only deep mutual affection, respect, and the kind of protective bond that develops between siblings who have faced challenges together. "Hey, Tommy," Carlos said, setting aside his application essays to focus completely on his younger brother. "I heard from my guidance counselor that they're planning to start a little league program specifically designed for kids with disabilities next spring. Maybe you could think about signing up and actually playing the game instead of just watching it." Tommy's face immediately flushed with embarrassment and frustration. "That's not real baseball, Carlos. That's just, I don't know, charity baseball. It's not the same thing as competing at the highest level." "Tommy," Rosa scolded gently but firmly, "don't speak that way about opportunities to participate in the sport you love so much. Any chance to be involved in baseball should be considered a blessing, not something to dismiss." But Tommy had already wheeled himself away from the dinner table, his appetite completely gone, and his mood darkened by the suggestion that he should settle for what he perceived as a watered-down version of the game he loved with such intensity. He had heard about these well-intentioned special programs before, adults organizing modified games where everyone received participation trophies regardless of performance, where competition was discouraged in favor of inclusion, and where the fundamental nature of baseball as a meritocracy was sacrificed in the name of making everyone feel good. That wasn't what Tommy wanted from baseball. He wanted the real thing, the pressure of competition, the satisfaction of success earned through skill and effort, the opportunity to prove that his disability didn't define his capabilities or limit his potential contributions to the game. Later that night, as October rain began pattering steadily against his bedroom window, Tommy lay in his narrow bed staring at the poster that dominated one entire wall of his small room. The image showed Pete Rose sliding headfirst into second base, his uniform dirty, his face contorted with determination and effort, his body extended in a desperate attempt to beat the throw. The photograph captured everything Tommy admired about his hero: the relentless determination, the refusal to give anything less than maximum effort, the way Rose played every single play as if his career depended on the outcome. Tommy had memorized every significant statistic from Pete Rose's remarkable career: 4,256 career hits, more than any player in the history of Major League Baseball, 3 World Series championships with the Cincinnati Reds, National League Rookie of the Year in 1963, 17 All-Star Game selections, and countless records for hustle, determination, and the kind of old-fashioned work ethic that seemed increasingly rare in modern professional sports. Most importantly to Tommy, Pete Rose had never been the biggest, fastest, or most naturally talented player on any team he had ever joined. But he had outworked everyone, outthought everyone, and out-hustled everyone on his way to becoming one of the most successful players in baseball history. "If I could just talk to him once," Tommy whispered to the darkness surrounding his bed. "Just once, I could show him that I understand what baseball really means. I could prove that someone like me can contribute to the game in ways that matter." Outside his window, the autumn rain intensified, drumming against the roof of their modest home with increasing urgency. In a few hours, Miguel would wake up for his 5 a.m. shift at the steel mill. Rosa would begin her long day of house cleaning in the suburbs, and Carlos would head off to McKinley High School, where college recruiters sometimes appeared in the stands during football games, watching for talent that might earn scholarships to universities. Tommy would spend the day with Mrs. Chen, the elderly Chinese-American neighbor who looked after him when his parents worked. Mrs. Chen was kind and patient, helping him with homework and listening to his endless baseball commentary, but she didn't really understand his passion for the game or his dreams of somehow becoming involved at a level beyond that of a spectator. But tonight, surrounded by baseball cards, newspaper clippings, and statistical charts that covered every surface of his small bedroom, Tommy Martinez allowed himself to dream of something that seemed impossible. A moment when his hero might see past his wheelchair to recognize the heart of a true baseball fan, someone who understood the game's deeper meanings and could contribute to its legacy in ways that transcended physical limitations. Tomorrow would bring another day of watching from the sidelines, another day of dreaming about possibilities that seemed forever out of reach. But for now, in the quiet darkness of his room, Tommy held on to hope. The same kind of hope that had sustained Pete Rose through thousands of at-bats, hundreds of games, and countless moments when giving up would have been easier than continuing to fight. 3 weeks later, the crisp October air carried the unmistakable promise of approaching winter as Tommy and Miguel made their way through the parking lot toward Riverfront Stadium for what both father and son understood might be the Cincinnati Reds' final home game of another disappointing season. The team had struggled throughout the year, and local newspapers were already speculating about potential roster changes, coaching staff modifications, and organizational restructuring during the upcoming off-season. For Tommy Martinez, each remaining game felt increasingly precious, each opportunity to watch Pete Rose take the field more valuable than the last. At 42 years old, Rose was clearly in the twilight of his legendary career, and rumors circulated constantly about his potential retirement, possible trade to another team, or transition into a coaching role that would keep him in baseball but remove him from active competition. They had arrived at the stadium a full hour before the scheduled first pitch, following their established tradition of watching batting practice and absorbing the complete atmosphere of professional baseball from the first moment players stepped onto the field until the final out of the 9th inning. The concrete behemoth of Riverfront Stadium might not have possessed the nostalgic charm of older ballparks like Fenway Park or Wrigley Field, but to Tommy, it represented something far more significant than architectural beauty. It was a cathedral dedicated to the sport he loved, a place where dreams and reality intersected on perfectly manicured grass under brilliant stadium lights. "Papa, do you think we could try to get closer to the field today?" Tommy asked hopefully as they settled into their usual section in the upper deck behind home plate. "I brought my most valuable Pete Rose card with me. The 1973 Topps rookie card that I bought with my birthday money. Maybe if we wait near the dugout after the game ends." Miguel hesitated, his weathered face showing the conflict between wanting to fulfill his son's wishes and protecting him from almost certain disappointment. Their previous attempts to obtain autographs had resulted in polite but firm rejection by security guards, who explained that the area near the dugout was strictly reserved for season ticket holders, VIP guests, and credentialed media personnel, not factory workers and their disabled sons from Cincinnati's working-class East Side. "We can certainly try, mijo," Miguel finally agreed, "but I want you to prepare yourself for the possibility that it might not work out the way we hope. Sometimes these things are more complicated than they appear from a distance." As batting practice concluded and both teams began their final preparations for the evening's game, Tommy noticed unusual activity near the visitors' dugout that immediately captured his attention. A carefully organized group of children, all wearing matching bright yellow t-shirts emblazoned with what appeared to be the logo of a local charity organization, was being escorted onto the warning track by adults carrying clipboards, cameras, and official-looking credentials. The children appeared to be roughly Tommy's age, and as he watched more closely, he realized with a complex mixture of curiosity, admiration, and inevitable envy that several of the kids were using wheelchairs, crutches, or other assistive devices. This was clearly some type of special program, possibly a Make-A-Wish Foundation event, a hospital charity initiative, or a similar organization that provided once-in-a-lifetime experiences for children facing serious medical challenges. "Look, Papa," Tommy said quietly, pointing toward the field with barely concealed longing. "Those kids are getting to walk on the actual warning track where the players warm up. They're going to meet the team up close." Miguel followed his son's gaze and felt the familiar, crushing weight of helplessness that overwhelmed him whenever he was confronted with stark reminders of the opportunities his son couldn't access, simply because their family lacked the right connections, sufficient financial resources, or knowledge of how to navigate the complex world of charitable programs and special events. "Maybe, someday, we'll find a way for you to have an experience like that, Tommy," Miguel said softly. "For now, let's focus on enjoying the game we can see from here." The game itself unfolded as typical late-season baseball, both teams playing with limited urgency since playoff positions had long been determined, younger players receiving valuable major league experience, while established veterans rested for the off-season, and an overall atmosphere of professional obligation rather than passionate competition. Pete Rose, despite his advanced age and the meaningless nature of the contest in terms of standings, played with his characteristic intensity and focus. Every at-bat was approached with the same concentrated determination that had defined his entire career. Every defensive play was executed with maximum effort, and every base-running opportunity was pursued with the aggressive style that had earned him his famous nickname. In the bottom of the seventh inning, with the Cincinnati Reds trailing 3-2 and threatening to score the tying run, Pete Rose stepped into the batter's box with 2 runners on base and 2 outs, exactly the kind of clutch situation where his reputation for delivering under pressure had been forged over 2 decades of professional baseball. The sparse crowd, consisting primarily of dedicated fans who attended games regardless of the team's performance, rose spontaneously to their feet in genuine appreciation for the aging legend. Tommy gripped his wheelchair's armrests with white-knuckled intensity as he leaned forward as far as safety would permit, silently willing his hero to deliver in the clutch one more time. The count slowly worked its way to 3-2, a full count that represented the ultimate confrontation between pitcher and hitter, where the slightest mistake by either participant could determine the outcome of the entire at-bat. The pitcher, a rookie call-up eager to prove himself worthy of a permanent roster spot, wound up and delivered a fastball directly down the center of the strike zone. Pete Rose's swing was absolutely perfect, not the violent uppercut motion of a power hitter seeking to drive the ball over the fence, but the level, controlled stroke that had produced more base hits than any player in the long and distinguished history of Major League Baseball. The ball shot like a bullet between the first and second baseman, driving in both runners and giving the Reds a 4-3 lead that would prove to be the final score. As Rose rounded first base with his characteristic head-first slide, avoiding the tag by mere inches, Tommy found himself standing, a term he used despite his paralysis, and cheering with complete abandon, his voice joining the roar of appreciation that filled the stadium. "That's exactly why he's the greatest clutch hitter who ever lived, Papa. That's why he'll always be my hero." Miguel watched his son's pure, unfiltered joy with a complicated mixture of pride and sadness. In moments like these, Tommy's physical disability seemed to completely disappear, leaving only a young boy's passionate love for the game and absolute admiration for his sporting hero. These were the moments that made all the financial sacrifice, all the difficult scheduling, and all the emotional investment worthwhile. After the game concluded with the Reds' 4-3 victory, as the majority of fans filed toward the stadium exits and began their journeys home, Miguel surprised his son by steering his wheelchair toward the field-level concourse instead of joining the exodus. "Come on, mijo," Miguel said with uncharacteristic boldness. "Let's see exactly how close we can get to the players' area. Maybe tonight will be different." They navigated through the concrete corridors of Riverfront Stadium, past concession stands that were already beginning to close for the evening, and maintenance crews who were starting their post-game cleanup routines. The area near the players' entrance was significantly more crowded than usual, filled with autograph seekers, hoping for one final opportunity to meet their heroes, and sports journalists conducting post-game interviews for the following day's newspaper coverage. Tommy clutched his prized 1973 Pete Rose baseball card, a pristine specimen that represented months of carefully saved allowance money and birthday gifts. His plan was elegantly simple. If he could get within speaking distance of his hero, he would tell Pete Rose how much his hustle, determination, and never-give-up attitude meant to a young boy who couldn't run, but absolutely refused to abandon his dreams of being connected to baseball in some meaningful way. As they positioned themselves near the edge of the crowd, maintaining the respectful distance that their lack of special credentials required, Tommy noticed that the group of special needs children from the pre-game ceremony was still present, their adult supervisors taking group photographs and organizing what appeared to be an elaborate meet-and-greet session with several Cincinnati Reds players. A wave of intense disappointment washed over Tommy as he realized that these children, who undoubtedly deserved every moment of special attention they were receiving, would get the kind of access to professional baseball players that he had dreamed about for years, simply because their parents or caregivers had successfully connected with the right charitable organizations and advocacy groups. "Maybe we should start heading to the truck, Papa," Tommy said quietly, his earlier enthusiasm deflated by the stark reminder of the barriers that separated his dreams from reality. "I don't think the security guards are going to let us get close enough to actually talk to any of the players." But before Miguel could respond to his son's suggestion, the crowd began to stir with obvious excitement and anticipation. Pete Rose emerged from the clubhouse entrance, dressed in casual street clothes, but still wearing his iconic Cincinnati Reds cap. Instead of heading directly toward the players' parking area, as most athletes did after games, Rose moved purposefully toward the group of special needs children and their adult supervisors. Tommy watched in absolute fascination as his hero knelt down to speak individually with each child, taking obvious time and care to make personal connections rather than simply signing autographs and posing for photographs. Rose asked thoughtful questions about their favorite players, their favorite teams, their own experiences with baseball, and their dreams for the future. When Rose encountered a boy in a wheelchair similar to Tommy's, who mentioned that he participated in wheelchair baseball leagues. Pete's eyes immediately lit up with genuine interest and curiosity. No kidding. That's incredible. How fast can you wheel around the bases when you really get going? I don't really know, the boy replied shyly. We don't usually keep track of times or anything like that. Well, we definitely should find out, Rose said, with an authentic grin that transformed his entire face. Speed is absolutely everything in this game, whether you're running or rolling. Maybe I can come watch one of your games sometime. Tommy was completely mesmerized by this interaction, witnessing a side of Pete Rose that transcended his well-publicized on-field reputation for intensity and competitiveness. This wasn't the aggressive base runner who dove headfirst into second base, or the fierce competitor who argued passionately with umpires over close calls. This was a man who clearly understood that his fame and success carried genuine responsibility, who recognized that his attention and encouragement could literally change the trajectory of a young person's life. As the organized meet and greet session began to wind down and the special needs children and their supervisors started making their way toward the stadium exits, Pete Rose began walking toward the players' parking area. The remaining crowd of autograph seekers immediately pressed forward with renewed urgency, but stadium security guards quickly formed a protective barrier that prevented all but the most persistent fans from getting within speaking distance. Tommy found himself pushed inevitably toward the back of the crowd, his wheelchair making it impossible to compete physically with the taller, more aggressive adults who were determined to get one final autograph or photograph before the baseball season officially ended. "Mr. Rose," someone shouted desperately from the front of the crowd. "Just one more autograph, please." "Pete, over here. My son's been waiting for hours." The cacophony of competing voices blended together into an incomprehensible wall of sound that seemed to grow louder and more demanding by the second. Tommy felt tears of frustration beginning to well up in his eyes as he realized that he had come tantalizingly close to meeting his hero, only to be defeated by the simple reality that his wheelchair couldn't navigate through crowds of determined adults. In a moment of pure desperation, drawing upon every ounce of courage and determination he possessed, Tommy took the deepest breath his young lungs could manage and shouted with absolute clarity, "Charlie Hustle!" The famous nickname cut through the crowd noise like a perfectly thrown fastball, sharp and unmistakable. Pete Rose stopped walking immediately and turned around, his experienced eyes scanning the faces of the crowd behind him. His gaze moved past the adults waving baseball cards and official team photographs, past the aggressive collectors who attended every game hoping to profit from players' signatures, and landed directly on Tommy Martinez, a 12-year-old boy in a wheelchair holding a pristine baseball card with tears streaming down his face. For what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, their eyes met across the crowded concourse. Then Pete Rose did something that would fundamentally change Tommy's life forever. He smiled with genuine warmth, nodded directly at Tommy with unmistakable recognition, and began walking straight toward him with purposeful determination. The crowd of autograph seekers parted reluctantly as Pete Rose made his deliberate way toward Tommy, security guards stepping aside with expressions of puzzled surprise at this unexpected change in routine. The constant din of voices and requests gradually subsided as people throughout the concourse began to realize that the Cincinnati Reds legend had singled out the boy in the wheelchair for special, personal attention. "Charlie Hustle, huh?" Pete said as he approached Tommy's position, his voice carrying the distinctive Cincinnati accent that Tommy had heard in countless television interviews and radio call-in shows over the years. "You know, most people just call me Pete these days. But I've always appreciated a young fan who knows the old nicknames and understands their significance." Up close, Pete Rose looked noticeably older than he appeared on television broadcasts or in newspaper photographs, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of 2 decades spent squinting at pitches under bright stadium lights, and grey beginning to show prominently in his dark hair. But his smile was genuinely warm and authentic as he knelt down beside Tommy's wheelchair, bringing himself to exact eye level with the awe-struck 12-year-old. I've been watching you play for 3 years now, Mr. Rose, Tommy managed to stammer, his carefully rehearsed speech completely forgotten in the overwhelming reality of actually meeting his hero face to face. You're absolutely the greatest player who ever lived, and I try to come to every single game I possibly can. Pete chuckled with obvious pleasure at the young fan's enthusiasm. Well, I certainly don't know about being the greatest son, but I sincerely appreciate the sentiment and the loyalty. What's your name? Tommy Martinez, sir. And this is my papa, Miguel. Pete Rose stood up and extended his hand to Miguel with the same genuine warmth he had shown his son. It's a real pleasure to meet you both. You know, Tommy, I noticed you out there during batting practice earlier today, cheering pretty enthusiastically for an old player like me. Do you come to a lot of games here at Riverfront? Whenever Papa can afford the tickets, Tommy replied with the brutal honesty that only children possess, then immediately blushed deep red at his unfiltered candor. I mean, we love coming here to support the team and watch great baseball. Pete's expression grew noticeably more thoughtful and serious. Having grown up in a working-class family on Cincinnati's west side himself, he understood completely the financial sacrifice that brought a factory worker and his disabled son to even the cheapest seats in a major league stadium. Every ticket represented overtime, hours worked, meals skipped, or other family necessities postponed. Tell you what, Tommy, Pete said after a moment of consideration. Are you and your father free next Saturday afternoon? We've got a day game against the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I'd really like you to be my personal guest for the entire experience. Tommy's eyes widened in complete disbelief, his mouth opening and closing silently as he struggled to process what he had just heard. Your personal guest? What exactly does that mean, Mr. Rose? It means you get to arrive early and watch batting practice from behind home plate instead of way up in the stands. It means you might get to meet some of the other players and see parts of the stadium that regular fans never get to experience. It means you'll have the best seats in the house to watch what might be one of my final games as a Cincinnati Red. Would you be interested in something like that? The question was almost too overwhelming for Tommy's 12-year-old mind to fully comprehend. He looked up at his father with desperate hope, and Miguel nodded his encouragement despite his own shock at this completely unexpected turn of events. Yes, sir, I would love that more than anything else in the entire world. Pete reached into his back pocket and pulled out a simple white business card, writing something on the back in blue ink before handing it to Miguel. Call this number on Friday morning and ask to speak with Janet Morrison. She handles all the special arrangements for VIP guests and player families. Just tell her that Pete Rose personally invited you and Tommy, and she'll take care of everything. Tickets, parking passes, stadium access, the complete treatment. As Pete prepared to continue toward the parking area, Tommy suddenly remembered the precious baseball card that had been clutched in his sweating palm throughout this entire surreal encounter. Mr. Rose, could you possibly sign this for me? Pete examined the 1973 Topps card with obvious appreciation and professional respect. Wow, this is in absolutely beautiful condition, Tommy. Are you completely sure you want me to sign it? Collectors always say cards are worth more money when they're left unsigned. I don't care at all about the money, sir, Tommy said with fierce conviction. This card has been with me to every single game I've ever attended. Having your signature on it would mean more to me than anything else I could ever own. Pete borrowed a pen from one of the nearby adults and carefully signed his name across the bottom border of the card with practiced precision. But instead of immediately returning the card to Tommy, he flipped it over and wrote a longer, more personal message on the blank back. "There you go, Tommy. Something special to remember our first official meeting." As Pete Rose walked away toward the players' parking area, Tommy immediately turned the card over to read the message that would soon become the most treasured possession in his bedroom. Written in Pete's distinctive handwriting were these words: "To Tommy Martinez, never let anyone tell you what you can't accomplish. Keep hustling in everything you do. Your friend and biggest fan, Pete Rose, the Lasher 14. The crowd that had witnessed this extraordinary interaction gradually dispersed, many people nodding approvingly and making positive comments about what they had just observed. Miguel stood behind his son's wheelchair in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred and wondering if he had somehow misunderstood the entire conversation. "Papa," Tommy whispered, his voice thick with emotion and barely controlled excitement. "Did that really happen? Did Pete Rose actually invite us to be his personal guests at next Saturday's game?" "Sí, mijo, it really happened. I heard every word." The drive home through Cincinnati's familiar East Side neighborhoods was filled with animated conversation as Tommy replayed every moment of the encounter with obsessive detail, analyzing every word Pete Rose had spoken, marveling at the genuine kindness and interest his hero had demonstrated, and speculating about what the upcoming VIP experience might include. Miguel listened with growing amazement at his son's detailed recall of the conversation, realizing that this brief meeting had already become one of the most significant and meaningful moments in Tommy's young life. The boy, who had spent 3 years watching his hero from distant bleacher seats, had actually spoken with Pete Rose, received personal attention and encouragement, and been invited back for an experience that would have been unimaginable just hours earlier. When they arrived home at their modest house on Elm Street, Rosa was waiting in the kitchen with Carlos, both eager to hear about the evening's game and particularly interested in whether Pete Rose had delivered in the clutch situation they had heard about on the radio broadcast. Tommy's breathless account of meeting Pete Rose was so enthusiastic and detailed that his words tumbled over each other in his urgent desire to share every aspect of the experience. Rosa and Carlos listened with expressions of growing amazement as Tommy described the signed baseball card, the personal invitation to next Saturday's game, and the encouraging message about never letting anyone tell him what he couldn't accomplish. "Mama, he knew my name. He called me by my name and wrote it on my baseball card, and he said I should never let anyone tell me what I can't do." Rosa examined the signed card with appropriate reverence, understanding immediately its significance in her son's carefully constructed world of baseball dreams and aspirations. "This is incredibly special, Tommy. You must take very good care of this treasure. I'm going to frame it tonight and hang it right above my bed, where I can see it first thing every morning," Tommy declared with absolute conviction. "And Papa, we have to remember to call that Janet person on Friday morning to arrange everything for Saturday's game. Pete Rose personally invited us." Carlos looked up from his college application essays with genuine admiration and perhaps a touch of envy for his younger brother's incredible experience. "Tommy, do you realize how amazing this is? Pete Rose is a legitimate baseball legend, and he specifically picked you out of that entire crowd of people. That's seriously cool." Over the following days, Tommy's excitement proved to be completely uncontainable. He shared the story of meeting Pete Rose with everyone who would listen: Mrs. Chen, his teachers at Sacred Heart Elementary School, neighborhood kids who gathered on front porches after school, even the mailman who delivered to Elm Street each afternoon. Some adults were skeptical of Tommy's account, finding it difficult to believe that such a famous athlete would pay special personal attention to one random young fan. But Tommy possessed the signed baseball card as irrefutable proof, and more importantly, he had the business card with the phone number Pete Rose had personally provided to his father. On Friday morning, Exactly as Pete Rose had instructed, Miguel called the number written on the back of the business card. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed, still hardly believing that this opportunity was real. A professional, friendly woman's voice answered on the second ring. Cincinnati Reds front office, this is Janet Morrison speaking. Hello, Mrs. Morrison. My name is Miguel Martinez, and Pete Rose told me to call you about bringing my son Tommy to tomorrow's game as his personal guest. There was a brief pause. Then Janet's voice became immediately warm and enthusiastic. Oh yes, Mr. Martinez. Pete told me all about meeting Tommy after Wednesday's game. We're absolutely thrilled to have you and your son as our special guests tomorrow. Tommy sounds like exactly the kind of young fan who truly understands what baseball is all about. Janet proceeded to provide detailed instructions that seemed almost too good to be true. They should arrive at the stadium's VIP entrance at 11 a.m. sharp. Parking passes would be waiting for them at the main gate under Miguel's name. Tommy would have access to areas of Riverfront Stadium that most fans never saw, including the opportunity to watch batting practice from field level and possibly meet several players beyond Pete Rose himself. As Miguel hung up the phone and turned to find his entire family gathered anxiously in the kitchen, waiting for confirmation that this incredible opportunity was genuine, he could only shake his head in amazement. It's completely real, he announced simply. Tomorrow, Tommy gets to experience baseball like never before. That night, Tommy lay awake for hours, staring at his signed Pete Rose baseball card, now carefully protected in a plastic sleeve and positioned where he could see it from his pillow. The encouraging message Pete had written continued to resonate deeply. Never let anyone tell you what you can't accomplish. For the first time in his young life, those words didn't feel like empty platitudes from well-meaning adults who didn't understand his situation. They felt like a genuine challenge from someone who had achieved greatness through determination and relentless effort rather than natural gifts alone. Pete Rose had never been the most talented player on any team he joined, but he had become the hit king through pure hustle and an absolute refusal to accept limitations. As gentle rain began falling against his bedroom window, Tommy made a silent promise to himself. Whatever opportunities this unexpected friendship with Pete Rose might bring, he would approach them with the same intensity and dedication that had made his hero legendary. He wouldn't waste this chance or allow his physical disability to limit what might be possible. Saturday morning dawned crisp and brilliantly clear, with the kind of perfect autumn sunshine that made Cincinnati look like a postcard. Tommy had been awake since 4:30 a.m., far too excited to sleep, repeatedly checking and rechecking his Pete Rose card, the clothes his mother had carefully selected for this special occasion, and mentally rehearsing what he might say to his hero during their second meeting. Rosa had chosen Tommy's outfit with the careful attention usually reserved for Christmas morning or school picture day. His newest jeans, a spotless Cincinnati Reds jersey that Carlos had given him for his birthday, and white sneakers that she had scrubbed until they gleamed like new. Miguel had taken his first personal day from the steel mill in over 3 years, understanding that this experience was far more important than the overtime pay he would sacrifice. The Martinez family arrived at Riverfront Stadium at exactly 11 a.m., following the directions Janet Morrison had provided during their Friday phone conversation. Instead of joining the usual stream of fans heading toward general admission entrances, they were directed to a special VIP parking area, typically reserved for team officials, visiting dignitaries, and season ticket holders who paid thousands of dollars annually for premium access. "This is absolutely incredible, Papa," Tommy said as they approached the players' entrance, a part of the stadium complex he had only glimpsed from distant seats. "I can't believe we're actually going behind the scenes, where the real baseball happens." Janet Morrison was waiting for them at the security checkpoint, and she proved to be exactly as warm and professional as her phone manner had suggested. A middle-aged woman with a genuine smile and an official Cincinnati Reds jacket, she greeted Tommy as if he were the most important person in all of Cincinnati. "Tommy Martinez, I've been looking forward to meeting you all week." Pete has told absolutely everyone on the staff about the young man who called him Charlie Hustle and impressed him so much with his knowledge and passion for the game. Are you ready for the complete behind-the-scenes experience? What followed were the most magical and transformative 4 hours of Tommy's entire life. Janet led them through corridors lined with framed photographs of Cincinnati Reds legends spanning decades of baseball history, past executive offices where front office personnel worked on player contracts and strategic planning, and into the clubhouse where current players were beginning their pre-game preparation routines. The clubhouse was a revelation that far exceeded Tommy's most detailed imaginings. Rather than the glamorous, pristine facility he had envisioned, it was clearly a working space filled with practical equipment, rows of wooden lockers bearing players' names, training and rehabilitation equipment, whirlpool baths for treating injuries, and the comfortable, lived-in atmosphere of professional athletes preparing for their daily work. The distinctive smells of leather conditioning oil, muscle liniment, and fresh laundry filled the air, while the sounds of spikes clicking on concrete floors and players engaging in casual conversation created an authentic soundtrack that no television broadcast could capture. "Tommy!" Pete Rose's voice boomed across the clubhouse as he spotted his young guest, immediately abandoning his conversation with a teammate to approach with obvious pleasure. "Right on time, just like a true professional. I told all the guys about you, and they've been eager to meet the young man who knows more about baseball strategy than most coaches." Several other players approached to meet Tommy, each taking genuine time to engage in conversation rather than simply offering perfunctory greetings. Johnny Bench, the legendary catcher whose smile was even more impressive in person, knelt down beside Tommy's wheelchair and asked thoughtful questions about his favorite defensive strategies and his analysis of various pitching approaches. "You know, Tommy," Johnny Bench said while signing an official National League Baseball, "Pete tells us you understand situational hitting better than most college players. That kind of baseball intelligence is really special, and it's something you can't teach. Either someone has that instinctive feel for the game, or they don't." But it was Dave Concepcion, the Reds' veteran shortstop and one of the most respected defensive players in Major League Baseball, who asked the question that would prove to be absolutely life-changing. "Tommy, have you ever given serious thought to coaching baseball? I mean, you obviously have an exceptional understanding of strategy and fundamentals. Coaching could be a way for you to stay actively involved in the sport for your entire life." The suggestion hit Tommy like a perfectly thrown fastball, unexpected, powerful, and impossible to ignore. In all his dreams about being connected to baseball, coaching had never occurred to him as a realistic possibility. In his limited experience, coaches were invariably former players, men who had earned their authority and credibility through their own playing careers and personal achievements on the field. The idea that his knowledge, passion, and analytical abilities might qualify him for such a role had simply never entered his imagination. I honestly never thought about coaching, Mr. Concepcion. Do you really think someone like me could teach other players?" "Someone like you," Pete Rose interjected, having overheard the conversation while discussing strategy with the team's batting coach. "Tommy, let me tell you something that I've learned over 20 years in professional baseball. The very best coaches aren't necessarily the most talented former players. The best coaches are the ones who truly understand every aspect of the game, who can analyze situations and recognize things that others miss, and who can communicate effectively with players of all skill levels." Pete paused, fixing Tommy with the same intense gaze that had intimidated opposing pitchers for 2 decades. "From what I've observed in our conversations, you possess all 3 of those essential qualities in abundance." Janet then escorted Tommy and his family onto the field itself for batting practice, where Tommy experienced the surreal privilege of sitting in the Cincinnati Reds dugout, the same wooden bench where his heroes had strategized, celebrated victories, and dealt with defeats throughout countless games over multiple seasons. From this unprecedented vantage point, Tommy could observe every aspect of pre-game preparation with the keen eye of someone who had studied baseball from afar but never experienced it from inside the professional environment. He watched pitchers working on specific grips and release points, infielders practicing double play timing and communication, and hitters adjusting their mechanics based on detailed video analysis. "What do you think about this, Tommy?" Pete Rose asked as they observed the opposing team's batting practice together. "How would you approach pitching to their cleanup hitter based on what you're seeing?" Tommy studied the batter carefully, drawing upon months of accumulated observation and analysis. "He's clearly a pull hitter who's looking for fastballs he can turn on, but I've noticed he's having trouble with his timing on breaking balls. I would start him with a changeup to disrupt his rhythm, then come back with a slider low and away. If I could get ahead in the count, I'd challenge him with a fastball on the outside corner where he can't pull it." Pete exchanged meaningful glances with Tony Perez, a former teammate who was now working as a hitting instructor for the organization. Tony nodded approvingly and made a note in his coaching notebook. "That's exactly the right approach, Tommy. You've got a natural eye for recognizing hitters' weaknesses and tendencies." As game time approached, Janet led the Martinez family to premium seats directly behind home plate, the absolute best viewing location in Riverfront Stadium, and a perspective on professional baseball that Tommy had never imagined experiencing. But more significant than the incredible view was how the Cincinnati Reds players continued to acknowledge him throughout the game, tipping their caps when they came to bat or returned to the dugout after making defensive plays. In the bottom of the fifth inning, with the Reds trailing 3-1 and runners on first and second base, Pete Rose stepped into the batter's box for what everyone in the stadium understood might be one of his final at-bats in a Cincinnati uniform. Before settling into his familiar stance, Rose looked directly toward Tommy and nodded with unmistakable intention and purpose. Tommy felt his heart racing as he realized his hero was dedicating this crucial plate appearance to him personally. The opposing pitcher, clearly trying to challenge the aging legend, threw a first-pitch fastball directly over the heart of the plate. Pete Rose's swing was poetry in motion, the same level, controlled stroke that had produced more hits than any player in baseball history. The ball exploded off Rose's bat with a sharp crack that echoed throughout the stadium, soaring high and deep toward the gap between left and center field. Tommy tracked the ball's trajectory with the practiced eye of someone who had watched thousands of similar swings, and he knew immediately that this hit would drive in both runners and give the Reds a 4-3 lead that would hold up for the remainder of the game. As Pete Rose crossed first base and rounded toward second, he pointed directly at Tommy with obvious pride and affection. Tommy was standing in his wheelchair, cheering with pure, unrestrained joy, while the entire section around them erupted in appreciation for both the clutch hit and the touching connection between the veteran player and his young fan. After the game concluded with Cincinnati's 4-3 victory, Pete Rose sought out Tommy and his family one final time before the day ended. "Tommy, I want you to have something that's been very important to me," Pete said, presenting the boy with a well-worn leather bat bag bearing Rose's name embroidered in gold thread. "This bag has traveled with me to every game for the past 8 seasons. I want you to keep it as a reminder that dreams can become reality if you're willing to work hard enough and never give up." But Pete Rose wasn't finished with his surprises. "I've been thinking seriously about what Dave Concepcion suggested earlier, about coaching. There's a youth baseball league here in Cincinnati for players aged 8 to 12 that's actively looking for assistant coaches. The head coach is Tony Perez. You met him in the clubhouse today. He's a good friend of mine and an excellent teacher. Would you be interested in helping coach real players in actual competitive games?" Tommy's mouth fell open in complete shock. The possibility of coaching actual players in real games with genuine competition and meaningful outcomes seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. "You mean coaching real players who are trying to win games and improve their skills?" "As real as it gets, son. Competitive youth league baseball with standings, playoffs, and everything that makes the sport meaningful." "What do you think?" Tommy looked toward his father with desperate hope, and Miguel nodded with tears beginning to form in his eyes. "I would absolutely love that opportunity more than anything else I could imagine, Mr. Rose." "Then it's completely settled. Janet will provide your father with Tony's contact information, and you can arrange to meet with him next week. The season runs from February through May, and you'll be working with young players who need exactly the kind of knowledge and passion you bring to baseball." As the Martinez family prepared to leave Riverfront Stadium that evening, Tommy carefully clutched Pete Rose's treasured bat bag while trying to process how completely his life had changed in the span of just 1 week. What had begun as a simple dream to obtain an autograph from his hero had evolved into an opportunity to become an active participant in the sport he loved more than anything else in the world. "Tommy," Pete Rose said as they reached the parking area, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, "I want you to remember what I wrote on your baseball card. Never let anyone tell you what you can't accomplish. You're about to prove that principle in ways that will inspire other people and change lives, including your own." The drive home through Cincinnati's familiar neighborhoods unfolded in contemplative silence, each member of the Martinez family struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. Tommy stared out the passenger window at streets and houses that looked exactly the same as they had that morning, but his entire world had been fundamentally transformed. That night, as Tommy carefully positioned Pete Rose's bat bag in his bedroom alongside his signed baseball card and began planning for his upcoming meeting with Tony Perez, he reflected on how dramatically his circumstances had changed. He was no longer just a fan watching from distant seats. He was about to become a coach, a teacher, someone who could share his knowledge and passion with young players who needed guidance and encouragement. The boy who had been told by medical professionals that he would never participate in organized baseball was about to discover that there were countless ways to be meaningfully involved in the sport, and that sometimes the most important contributions came from those who understood the game with their hearts and minds rather than their physical abilities. 8 months later, on a warm April afternoon at the Hamilton County Youth Baseball Complex, Coach Tommy Martinez positioned his wheelchair near the pitcher's mound, where 12 enthusiastic 8-year-old players formed an attentive semicircle around their assistant coach. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the meticulously maintained field, and the air carried the distinctive sounds of youth baseball, leather gloves popping, aluminum bats connecting with balls, and the excited chatter of young athletes learning to love America's pastime. "All right, Eagles, let's gather around for today's strategy session," Tommy called out, his voice carrying the natural authority he had developed over 6 months of coaching experience. "Today, we're going to focus on something that Pete Rose personally taught me: how to read a pitcher's tells and gain a competitive advantage at the plate." The mention of Pete Rose's name brought the expected murmur of excitement and awe from the young players. Tommy's connection to the Hit King had become legendary throughout Cincinnati's youth baseball community, but what truly impressed parents, league officials, and fellow coaches was Tommy's extraordinary ability to teach fundamental baseball concepts to children in ways that were both comprehensible and immediately applicable. "Coach Tommy," called out 8-year-old Marcus Williams, a small, determined boy who reminded Tommy of himself at that age. "What exactly is a tell, and how do we spot them during real games?" "That's an excellent question, Marcus, and I'm glad you asked," Tommy replied with the patient enthusiasm that characterized all his interactions with young players. A tell is when a pitcher accidentally reveals what type of pitch he's about to throw through subtle changes in his body language, grip, or preparation routine. Maybe he positions his glove slightly differently or adjusts his grip on the baseball before beginning his wind-up. The most successful hitters learn to recognize these small details and use that information to anticipate what's coming. Tony Perez, the head coach and former Cincinnati Reds star, observed from the dugout with continued amazement at Tommy's teaching effectiveness. When Pete Rose had first approached him about bringing a 12-year-old boy in a wheelchair onto his coaching staff, Tony had been politely skeptical about how such an arrangement could possibly work in practice. How could someone so young, with no personal playing experience, relate to young athletes who dreamed of running bases, making diving catches, and hitting game-winning home runs? But Tommy had exceeded every expectation from his very first practice session, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of how to communicate complex baseball strategies in language that children could immediately grasp and implement. His encyclopedic knowledge of baseball fundamentals, combined with infinite patience and a natural gift for breaking down complicated concepts into manageable pieces, made him more effective with younger players than many adult coaches who had decades of experience. "Now I want everyone to watch this demonstration carefully," Tommy continued, positioning Jamie Rodriguez, one of his more advanced players, on the mound. "Jamie, show us your grip for a four-seam fastball and pay attention to how you hold the ball in your glove." Jamie demonstrated his fastball grip with obvious pride, and Tommy nodded approvingly before addressing the other players. "Perfect technique, Jamie. Now, when you're preparing to throw a curveball, does anything change about how you position your hands or glove?" As Jamie worked through the motion of switching from a fastball to curveball grip, Tommy pointed out to the watching players how the pitcher's glove position changed by approximately 2 inches when he prepared to throw the breaking ball. "Do you see that subtle difference? Jamie's glove drops slightly and moves toward his body when he's gripping for a curveball. An observant hitter would notice that pattern after a few pitches and be ready for the breaking ball. This is exactly the kind of detail that separates good hitters from great ones." The lesson continued for 40 minutes, with Tommy demonstrating advanced concepts that many high school and even college coaches never addressed with their players. His ability to present sophisticated baseball strategy in terms that 8-year-olds could understand and immediately apply was genuinely remarkable. But even more impressive was his talent for connecting personally with each child and addressing their individual needs and challenges. Marcus Williams had been struggling with confidence at the plate, striking out frequently and becoming increasingly frustrated with his offensive performance. Rather than focusing solely on mechanical adjustments to his swing, Tommy had worked with Marcus on the mental aspects of hitting, teaching him to approach each at-bat with patience, focus, and realistic expectations rather than pressure to achieve immediate success. "Remember our conversations about plate discipline, Marcus," Tommy said as the boy stepped into the batter's box during scrimmage play. "Don't worry about getting a hit on every swing. Focus on seeing the ball clearly, tracking it from the pitcher's release point to your bat, and making solid contact. Trust your preparation and let the results take care of themselves." Marcus nodded with visible determination, took his carefully practiced stance, and worked the count to 2-2 by laying off several borderline pitches that would have resulted in easy strikeouts earlier in the season. When the next pitch arrived, a slow curveball that had been troubling him for weeks, Marcus waited patiently and drove the ball cleanly to left field for his first hit in over 2 weeks. As Marcus rounded first base with a brilliant smile of accomplishment, he looked directly toward Tommy and raised his fist in triumph. Tommy felt a surge of pride and personal satisfaction, unlike anything he had experienced as simply a fan watching professional baseball from the stands. This was different, This was about directly contributing to a young person's development, helping build confidence and character that would extend far beyond baseball into every aspect of life. Tommy was learning that coaching involved much more than teaching proper batting stances or fielding techniques. It was about inspiring young people to believe in themselves and pursue excellence through preparation and effort. After practice concluded and parents began arriving to collect their children, several approached Tommy to express gratitude for his work with their sons. These conversations had become routine, but they never failed to move Tommy deeply and remind him of the profound responsibility that came with influencing young minds. "Coach Tommy," said Maria Santos, Marcus's mother, with obvious emotion, "I don't know what you've said to Marcus during your individual sessions, but he's been practicing in our backyard every single day since your last conversation. More importantly, he's regained confidence in himself that extends into his schoolwork and other activities. You've given my son something precious, belief in his own capabilities." And Drew, similar testimonials from other parents had convinced Tommy that coaching represented far more than his personal pathway into organized baseball. He was genuinely making a difference in young people's lives, teaching lessons about persistence, teamwork, and character that would serve them well long after their youth baseball careers ended. As the players dispersed and the field grew quiet in the gathering dusk, Tony Perez approached Tommy with an expression of serious consideration. "Tommy, I need to discuss an important opportunity with you. The Hamilton County Youth League is expanding next year to include a new division specifically designed for players with various disabilities, physical, developmental, and emotional challenges that have prevented them from participating in traditional programs. League officials have asked me to recommend someone to serve as head coach for this new team." Tony paused, allowing the significance of his words to register fully. "I can't think of anyone better qualified than you for this position. You understand both the game of baseball and the experience of overcoming physical limitations better than anyone I know." Tommy's heart began racing with excitement and nervousness at the prospect of leading his own team. The opportunity to work directly with players who faced challenges similar to his own represented the perfect intersection of his baseball knowledge and personal understanding of what it meant to excel despite physical limitations. "Coach Perez, do you honestly believe I'm ready for that kind of responsibility? Leading an entire team is so much more demanding than serving as an assistant coach." Tommy, in 8 months, you've become one of the most respected youth baseball coaches in Cincinnati. Parents request specifically that their children be placed on teams where you're involved. Fellow coaches seek your advice on strategy and player development. You have a gift for teaching and inspiring young people that can't be learned from textbooks or coaching clinics. Tony's expression grew even more serious and encouraging. Besides, Pete Rose has volunteered to serve as a special advisor to the program, which means you'd be working directly with him on a regular basis to develop these young players. The prospect of collaborating closely with Pete Rose while coaching players who understood the challenges of overcoming physical limitations seemed almost too perfect to be real. Tommy felt tears of gratitude and excitement beginning to form as he contemplated this extraordinary opportunity. "I would be honored to accept that position, Coach Perez. When do we begin preparing?" "Hold on there, eager coach." Tony laughed warmly. "First, you need to complete this season with the Eagles and help them make a strong showing in the playoffs. But if you're truly interested, I'll submit your name to league officials next week and we can begin planning for next year's program." That evening, Tommy called Pete Rose to discuss this unexpected opportunity and seek guidance from his mentor. Pete's enthusiasm was immediate and infectious, confirming Tommy's growing sense that this coaching position represented his true calling. "Tommy, this is absolutely perfect for you," Pete said with obvious excitement. These young players need someone who understands exactly what they're experiencing, someone who can show them that their physical challenges don't have to limit their dreams or define their possibilities. You're going to change lives, son, and probably save some kids from giving up on themselves. Mr. Rose, when I first met you 8 months ago, I never imagined that any of this would be possible. I just wanted to get an autograph from my hero, and now I'm about to become a head coach working directly with you. Tommy, let me tell you something I've learned over 25 years in professional baseball, Pete replied, with the wisdom that came from a lifetime of competition and success. The most important victories aren't always recorded in box scores or reflected in statistics. Sometimes the most meaningful wins happen when you help someone else discover their own potential and overcome obstacles they thought were insurmountable. Pete paused, and Tommy could hear the genuine emotion in his voice. What you're doing with these young players, teaching them that excellence comes from preparation, effort, and heart, rather than physical gifts, that's going to have an impact that lasts far beyond their baseball careers. You're teaching them how to succeed in life. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning at the same Hamilton County Youth Baseball Complex where Tommy had developed his coaching skills, he sat in his wheelchair near home plate, addressing his new team for the first time. 12 players aged 8 to 14, each facing various physical or developmental challenges, formed an attentive circle around their new head coach. "My name is Coach Tommy Martinez," he began, his voice carrying confidence earned through months of successful teaching and mentoring. "I know that some of you may be wondering how someone in a wheelchair can teach you about baseball. Let me tell you something that Pete Rose taught me. The most important part of baseball happens between your ears, not between the foul lines." He gestured toward the field where they would spend the next 6 months learning, competing, and growing together. Every one of you is here because you love this game, despite the challenges you face. That passion and determination make you exactly the kind of players I want to coach. We're going to work harder than any team in this league. We're going to support each other through every difficulty, and we're going to prove that there are no limits to what we can accomplish together. Gina, as Tommy looked at the eager faces surrounding him, kids with cerebral palsy, autism, visual impairments, missing limbs, and other challenges that had previously excluded them from organized baseball, he felt the same surge of purpose and excitement that had driven Pete Rose to chase down seemingly impossible hits for over 2 decades. "Before we begin our first practice," Tommy continued, "I want to share with you the most important lesson I've ever learned. Never let anyone tell you what you can't accomplish. If you're willing to work, learn, and never give up, there's no limit to what's possible." Behind the backstop, Pete Rose watched this scene unfold with obvious pride and satisfaction. The boy who had called him Charlie Hustle from the distant bleachers had become a man who embodied the same qualities that had defined Rose's legendary career: relentless determination, unwavering commitment to excellence, and the absolute refusal to accept limitations as permanent barriers to success. In the distance, Tommy could see Miguel and Rosa Martinez sitting in the stands, their faces glowing with pride at what their son had accomplished. Carlos, now a college sophomore on a football scholarship, had driven home specifically to watch Tommy's first day as a head coach. As practice began and Tommy started teaching his new players the fundamentals of baseball, modified for their individual needs, but never compromised in terms of competitive integrity, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a discouraged boy watching his heroes from distant seats to a respected coach teaching the game, he loved to players who needed exactly the kind of inspiration and guidance he could provide. Tommy Martinez had discovered that Pete Rose was absolutely right. The most important victories in life often had nothing to do with final scores or championship trophies. Sometimes the greatest wins came from helping others discover their own potential and proving that with enough heart, determination, and refusal to accept defeat, any dream could become reality, even dreams that seemed impossible from the beginning.